What's up guys, welcome back to another build. Now in today's video we're going to be doing something that's been requested a bunch of times in my previous videos. This is what I like to call the DIY Gobi ladder. Now I built this ladder back in 2018, soon after I learned how to weld, and it's held up great. This is a great project for a beginner welder, fabricator. So in today's video, I'm going to show you guys how to build this ladder with a few design tweaks. I already have the new one built, so let me swap this guy for version 2.0. We'll talk a little bit about how it goes together, and then we'll get into this build video. Alright guys, this is version 2.0. Super happy with the way it turned out. Now this is a three-piece design. I basically built it exactly the same way that Gobi builds their ladder. We have a bracket here at the top that wraps around that top edge of the liftgate. And then we have another bracket down here which pinches onto the bottom lip of the liftgate. And your ladder bolts onto those two brackets. I spent a total of about 50 or 60 bucks. I bought everything at Lowe's. I did make a few design changes from the first version. As you can see, I switched from the square steel tubing to this round tubing. I did this because I really like the look of the round tubing over the square steel tubing. Conduit is just so affordable and readily available, and it's also plenty strong for this project. Now I know I'm building this on a 3rd gen 4Runner, but I'm pretty sure what I'm doing would apply to all the other generations of 4Runners. Possibly even Jeeps, FJs, Land Cruisers. I'm not exactly sure on that. Obviously the dimensions and the shape of the ladder would be different. But man, if you got a welder, angle grinder, and a drill, you can make this happen. Now speaking of welding, I like to tell this to everybody. If you're a DIYer, you like to build your own stuff, but you haven't quite made that jump into welding, I'd highly encourage you to do so. I wish I'd learned so much younger. It just opens up so many possibilities. It doesn't have to be expensive. You don't need a $1,000 machine to get started. Start off small, buy used. MIG welding mild steel is really not hard to do. You definitely don't need to be a professional to get decent results. The thing about mild steel is that it's a very forgiving metal. Even bad welds can still be really strong, so you definitely don't need to be a professional to get started. I taught myself by watching YouTube, and within a week I was building the brackets and lifting arms for this rooftop tent. So do whatever you got to do to get your hands on a welder. It's so rewarding, so much fun. I promise you won't regret it. But anyway, with all that said, let's get into the shop. Let me show you how we're gonna build this thing. All right guys, we are in the shop. I do want to give you guys a quick update on the rooftop tent build. Just got this thing painted. I love the color. This thing's turning out really nice. Should have another video up on this thing soon, but just wanted to kind of give you a glimpse of what's to come. Let's get back to the build. Alright guys, so what we've got are all the raw materials that we're going to need for this build. So starting with this plate steel, we have a piece of 8" by 18 16 gauge steel. Got it from Lowe's, but I already have marked out the amount that you're going to need. So we have a piece that's 4 inches by 9.5 inches, and I wouldn't go any thinner than 16 gauge steel. And with that we have some 3/8 by 1 inch bolts with the washers and nuts that go with that. I didn't mean for these bolts to be shorter, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to end up cutting these shorter anyway later on. Then we have a piece of 1.5 inch steel angle with a piece of 3/4 steel angle. This guy is 4 feet long, and you only need a 9.5 inch piece of this, so this is probably like 2 feet. And then with that we have 1/4 hardware. I really like to use the Allen drive cap bolts for these. These are 1 inch long. You're going to need 4 or 5 of these nuts and bolts. No washers for this guy. And then we have the 3/4 inch conduit that we're going to use for the rungs of the ladder, and then some Gorilla mounting tape, but you won't need that until the very end of the build. We're going to start by building the bottom bracket using our steel angle. Our bottom bracket is going to look just like this. We've already built one. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut, all the lengths are 9.5 inches, so we're going to cut one piece that's 9.5 inches out of our 3/4 inch steel angle, and then we're going to cut 3 9.5 inch lengths out of our 1.5 inch steel angle. So let's get those cut up real quick. Alright, we have our 4 pieces of steel angle cut out. The 3/4 of an inch and one of our 1.5 inch angles we're just going to set aside. We're not going to change or modify those at all. But 2 of our 1.5 inch steel angle we're going to modify. We're going to cut one side down to 3/4 of an inch on each piece. So it's going to look just like this guy. So it's 1.5 inches on one side, 3/4 of an inch on this side. So we just need to mark here and cut down these sides. I'm going to take all 4 pieces over to my belt sander, get all the edges sanded up nice and smooth so we just don't have these sharp, jagged edges anymore. We'll do that, and then we're going to get some pieces welded up. Alright, now that we have our 2 pieces trimmed down, I have one marked L for ladder and then BB for bottom bracket. This is going to be part of the ladder. And these pieces will eventually overlap each other just like that and fit on top of each other. Now this is an optional step, but I like to match the thickness of the bottom bracket to this piece here since they're going to be on top of each other. I just want it to look good. I'm also probably going to grind down this corner a little bit on this piece so that these pieces match up together a little bit better. So that looks much better. I think that looks good. So the next thing we need to do, we need to take the L piece, we're going to set that aside, get our 3/4 of an inch angle piece that we haven't touched, so it's still 9.5 inches. We're going to weld these together just like this. Alright guys, we're at the weld table. I've got my pieces nice and cleaned up, ready to weld. I'm going to be using my TIG welder. I'd much rather be using my MIG welder for this just because it'd be a lot faster, a lot easier. But this is what I'm learning right now, and I'm forcing myself to do this entire project with my TIG welder because, you know, you gotta learn somehow, right? So don't be too critical of my welds here. I'm very much a beginner at this, but it's gonna be perfect for this project. This is a great learning opportunity here. So let's get this thing welded up. Let me get this thing clamped up so I can get it tacked in place. Do a little quick test run. All right, let's do this. There we go. Alright, can't believe I'm showing you guys this, but here are my terrible TIG welds. This is like my very first TIG weld for anything I'm actually building, but it'll be fine for this. Quite a bit of porosity there. I might have to clean that up a little bit. I'm going to ground that down and we'll see how strong it is. This was the second bottom bracket that I built after I finished this ladder project. It's far from stacking dimes and plenty of room for improvement, but for my pride's sake, I have to show you that I'm improving a little bit. I also end up doing a fillet weld on this inside corner. As you can see, you have to grind it down a little bit to fit the other parts that have to go in here, but it's still plenty strong. I just didn't want to rely only on this weld right here, so just want to let you guys know that. Alright guys, here's the bracket that we made. I ground that weld down to see if I was getting any penetration. And let's just be honest, those welds sucked and I'm super embarrassed. So I ground them down so we didn't have to look at them anymore. But this is going to be plenty strong for what we need to do. The next thing we need to do is we need to drill 5 evenly spaced holes across here. So what we're going to be doing is we'll weld on these nuts just like this. So we'll get that welded up. What I did think about adding metal across the back here, just welding on another strip and then drill and then tap threads into that. But I think I'm just going to weld these little nuts on here. And then we'll end up with a bracket that looks like this. So let's get that drilled, get this welded up. Alright guys, we are done with our bottom bracket. We got everything welded up. We will have to add a couple holes on this side right here, but we'll do that later on. But super happy with that. This is definitely the smallest welds I've ever done. It's really cool with the spot weld feature. You can kind of just do these tiny little tacks all the way around, and this thing is going to be super strong. Really happy with that. So now that we're done with this bottom bracket, we can move on to the top bracket. So let's do that. All right, so for our top bracket, what we have is a piece of 16 gauge steel plate. What I have marked out here is the amount we're actually going to use, so you don't need a piece this big. I have the plate, and then I have these two 5/16 inch bolts. These are 1.5 inches, but I'll end up cutting these down. I don't need them to be that long. I've got this marked out 4 inches by 9.5. Again, this is for the 3rd gens. For anything else, you'll need to do your own measurements, but it's 9.5 just to match the width of everything else. Doesn't have to be this wide. If you wanted to, you could do it like this, and then 4 inches this way. But I'm a little OCD and I want everything to line up and match perfectly. So yeah, we're gonna cut this 16 gauge plate out, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut these basically in half and then weld those studs on just like that. And then this is for the top of our ladder, and we'll have 2 holes right here, and this will bolt through just like that. So when this is all bolted up, the rungs of our ladder are gonna go down here. And then this edge here will be rolled over, and this will be the part that hooks along the top edge of our hatch. So let's get this cut out. We'll get this edge rolled over, and then we'll get these little studs welded on. I'm just measuring and marking out a 1 inch line and then bending on that line. Now I know that wasn't the most civilized way to do things, but hey, it worked and it looks pretty good. I'm going to do a quick fitment check to make sure it fits on. I may have to trim this edge back a little bit to make sure it doesn't interfere with anything, but I'm happy with this. So the only other thing I have to do is weld those studs on at each end. Sweet. I sanded out some of the dings from the hammer and also rounded the edges. I think it just looks so much nicer with rounded edges on the belt sander. So now I am placing where I want these studs to be. I think I'm going to put them about 6 inches apart. This thing's 9.5 inches wide, so we'll do them 1 3/4 inches off this edge and about 3/4 deep off this edge. This will sit here. We'll line it up along that back edge, and then you just want to make sure you have plenty of room right here so you're not interfering with this edge. You know, once you go to put this on. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to drill 2 holes here and here. I'm going to cut this guy in half, just about. I don't need this full 1.5 inch length here. And then I'm going to weld it from the back side and then around the top side. Probably a little bit overkill, but at least I'll know it's strong. So let's drill some holes. Just cut those off at 3/4 of an inch, if you guys were wondering. And then we're just gonna take those little guys, place them in each hole, and then we'll get those welded up. One thing I'm gonna do before welding in those little studs, I'm going to line this guy up just how it will be, just like that. I'm gonna mark from the underside each hole, and then I'm gonna drill this out so that this all lines up with those studs after I'm done. So. Alright, after a little bit of cleanup, this is what our top bracket looks like. Underside, it's all nice and clean. Ground those welds down, sanded. Can't even tell they were there. So yeah, this looks good, but don't do like I did and weld on your studs the wrong direction. I did that the first time, so I had to redo it all. That kind of sucked. But we got it, and this piece will go on like this. I end up drilling the holes out quite a bit bigger on this piece to fit over the welds here. So that'll go on like that. Yeah, super happy with that. Now that we have the top bracket and the bottom bracket both done, we can move on to building the ladder. Alright guys, one little optional step that I like to do. We're going to take the piece that we cut off our 1.5 inch steel angle, this excess piece, and we're going to put it inside here. And what this does is it creates that clamping pressure for the bottom of our door. You could just have your screws pinch the bottom of the hatch if you wanted to and kind of bypass this piece, but I like to put this little extra little piece in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this in here, tighten all the screws down as tight as we can. And what that does is it creates these little witness marks, so you know exactly where those bolts will go. And we're going to take this to the drill press, and we're not going to drill through it. We're just going to use a larger drill bit than our 1/4 inch. I'm going to use like a 3/8 just to put a divot in the steel, and that way when this is in place, those screws will kind of rest in those little divots there and seat properly, and we'll have good clamping pressure all the way down. So I'm going to get this drilled out and we'll start building the ladder. Alright, with top of the lift gate on the 4Runner, awning's still looking good. DIY rooftop tent, also doing super well. If you haven't seen those videos, definitely go check those out. But I'm doing a quick fitment test here. That should just drop in. That's perfect. Now I am going to take advantage of these rib nuts that are already here from the spoiler that we removed. So I'm going to measure this, measure where those are underneath here, and drill that through here, and then also through this piece, because this is going to be sitting right here. So I have 2 holes drilled right through there. So I'm going to get that measured and drilled so that that'll be super solid. I'm not sure if any other models, I think the 3rd gen's the only one that has these, but if you don't have them, it's fine. But having this really makes that top bracket super solid. So let's knock that out. Alright, got my holes drilled in this and in that guy. And that lines up perfectly. I always drill those a little bit oversized so you have a tiny amount of wiggle room there. And then this guy will fit just like that. And we'll screw in the hardware that came with the vehicle. And tighten up these guys. Alright, that's all bolted in place. This thing is solid. It's not going anywhere. Now that this is installed, we're going to install the bottom bracket, and then we can start building our ladder. Alright, now to get our bottom bracket mounted up, you're going to want to have your ladder piece. Goes in like that. And then this guy will fit in there to create a clamp. Now I had to do a little bit more fit and finish to get all this to work together just right, but not much. I ended up shortening this down some, and then I shortened the width of that a little bit. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it already, but I did do a fillet weld in the inside of here just to strengthen up this corner. I ground it down so everything fits nicely, but it's way stronger now. Alright, we got all our pieces. Now we just need to start tightening everything down. This is the reason I like these Allen head bolts, is because these hex bolts, you just don't have much room to get a socket on them right here. These Allen bolts work really well. You don't have to crank down on these like just super hard. Just want them firmed up is plenty. It's not going anywhere. Alright, now that we have the top and the bottom brackets completely done and installed, we can move on to creating the shape of the ladder. What I like to do, I have a piece of basically coat hanger wire. I got to straighten it as much as possible. And I'm going to use this, I'm going to bend this to the shape that I want the ladder to be, and then this will be the template for that. On my previous ladder, I ended up getting the ladder a little bit too close, so you want to have it out far enough to where your feet aren't bumping into your gate. I'm going to get this wire shaped the way I want, and we'll start bending our tube. So let's do it. Once you have your wire template shaped the way you want to, you could transfer that over to a piece of plywood or a piece of cardboard. I just had a piece of scrap plywood laying around. You could test the shape. This is going to be absolutely perfect for me. One weird thing that I noticed, the shape of this is the same upside down as it is right side up. So I guess it doesn't matter which way's up. So yeah, this is going to be perfect. Now I can just use this to shape the tubing that's going to make up our ladder. So let's get to it. Alright, I have our rigid template laid out, and I went ahead and cut the 3/4 inch conduit in half. Those are 60 inches long a piece, and we should use closer to 50 inches I think for this project. So 60 inches would be perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make straight line marks on both pieces, and that way I can keep all of my bends straight, because you don't want one bend laid flat and the other bend kind of coming up. You want everything to kind of lay flat like the template is. So if you mark a straight line down both pieces, that gives you a reference. That way you don't end up with a twisted, bent up piece of metal. So yeah, I'm going to mark that, and then we'll start making some cuts at our bend points to get this to bend into the shape that we want. So yeah, let's get to it.
Quick pro tip, before you get into the cutting and the bending and welding of this conduit pipe, go ahead and take some 100 grit sandpaper and just sand off the galvanized coating. You're going to need to do it before you weld and paint anyway, but it's just a little easier to go ahead and do it when the pipe is still one solid piece.
Alright, we have our line drawn so we can keep everything straight. We're basically going to overlay this. I'm going to give myself a little extra room right here. And then we're just going to mark at the bends. We're going to cut here, not all the way through. We're going to cut some little wedges out. We'll cut, we'll bend to here, make sure it lines up, and then we'll mark, cut, all the way down. It's kind of a little slow process, but we just want to make sure everything works. So we're going to get this marked real quick, and then we'll cut. I'll show you how we're going to cut our wedges to make the bends. Alright, this is the little wedge that we just cut out, left it attached here at the bottom, and now we can just push it up to make an angle. That's not going to be enough, so I'm going to end up just cutting a little bit off the top until it bends enough to get to the desired angle I want. So we have that bend about the way we want it. We're going to come down here, make that bend. This was definitely my best cut. When you want to change the angle, you only want to cut small wedges off this side, not back here. You want to kind of all end up the same down here, but thicker up here, if that makes sense. If you look at this one, my very first one was bad, and I kept widening it down here as well. You don't want to do that. But yeah, this one looks really good. Alright guys, we got the last bend done. I am going to shorten it up a bit since I know my template's the right length. I'm going to bring it back a little bit. I still want a little bit of wiggle room to fine tune it, but we'll shorten it up and then go see how it looks on the vehicle. Alright, let's see how it looks. I just have it next to my bottom bracket down here. This actually looks really good. It looks a lot better than it did before I trimmed it up. So I think I'll be able to just mark right up here at the top, cut that, and then we'll cut an angled cut down here to match the angle of the bottom bracket. Alright, got everything trimmed up. I got my angle down here, shortened up here. And this is going to be perfect. That looks so good. Now I just need to make a second one of these and we can get everything tacked in place. Alright, we have both pieces of our tubing bent exactly the same. What I think I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring my 4Runner in here because I don't have an extension cord for my 220 welder. This part is a bunch of back and forth between the vehicle and the welder to get everything tacked in place just right. So I'm going to move that in here and we'll start getting things tacked in place and welded up. Alright, now that we have the side rails shaped exactly the way we want them, we're going to tack all of our angled cuts in place. I'm just going to go slow, start at the bottom. I'm going to work my way between the vehicle and the welder back and forth, working my way up to the top just to make sure everything fits nicely. You could weld it all in one go if you wanted, if you're really confident it's all going to fit. But I'm just going to take it slow, go back and forth until that's all welded up. And then once everything is in place on our rails, we can tack our rails to the bottom and the top bracket. So let's get to it. Before I weld anything on this galvanized pipe, I am going to use my disc sander, clean up around the area that I'm going to be welding and removing that galvanized coating. You don't want to weld on top of that galvanized coating, and you also don't want to breathe the fumes that come off that coating. It affects everyone differently. I've never had a problem with it, but I've also taken every precaution possible by cleaning up the metal and not breathing any fumes that are coming off my welder. If you are doing it this way, I just want you to be careful and know about the hazards. This stuff can make you sick. So yeah, let's get this cleaned up and get it welded up. Once you have one side rail the way you want, just match the other one to that instead of fitting it up on the vehicle. That's what I'm doing right here with some clamps. Just matching these angles just right and get them to match up. That way everything will line up much better.
Now it's time to cut the rungs of the ladder. I decided to go with 1/2 inch conduit for the rungs, and I just used a piece of my 3/4 inch conduit as a template and then cut out with my grinder the notch. It's really not that hard to get a nice fit with the grinder if you take your time. Once I had one side done, I could measure and then do the other side. I ended up cutting them 7.5 inches apart.
Alright guys, got the rungs in place. Everything's just clamped up at the moment. Y'all check out this fitment. not bad for not having a tube notcher. It's just done with the angle grinder, and if you take your time, you can get a really nice fit up. Super happy with that. But yeah, basically what I'm doing here is just figuring out the spacing of the rungs, making sure everything's nice and straight. Now that I have everything the way I want it, I'm gonna start tacking things together. I'm gonna tack it to the bottom bracket first, then the top bracket, and then we'll tack up the rungs. Once everything's tacked up, we'll take the ladder section off, weld it all up, and then we'll be ready for paint. But yeah, super happy with this fitment. Alright guys, we have all the rungs tacked in place. I did do a quick strength test where I put my full body weight on the ladder just with everything tacked like it is, which was kind of dumb, but it did hold my weight, which was awesome. So now that everything's tacked in place, I'm going to unbolt it from the top up here and the bottom and get this whole thing welded up. But man, I really like the way this thing looks. Alright, check it out. Let's get this thing welded up. Alright guys, we finally got this thing fully welded up. It looks really good. I could definitely tell a big difference between my first welds and my last welds, so that was really encouraging. I'm going to do a little strength test to see how it compares to my first ladder. I'm just going to put my full weight on them. See how that feels. I feel like there's a little bit more deflection in the square one than my new one. Sweet. Let's get this thing primed up. One thing I forgot to show you guys, at the bottom of your ladder, you're going to want to drill 3 holes that matches up with your bottom bracket. I just clamp them together and drill them all at the same time. And then I just have some small 1/2 inch quarter 20 bolts that bolt all that together. You won't be able to bolt it up until you have it on the vehicle, and once it's all tightened up, it just really solidifies everything. So just wanted to mention that. I'm going to sand this thing down, get it primed, get it painted, and get it on the car.
I did end up sanding off all of the galvanized coating, which doesn't take very long with some 100 grit sandpaper, but you don't want to paint over that galvanized coating. I start by using Rust-Oleum self-etch primer. I do 3 to 4 light coats of that. Once that's dry, I scuff the surface with Scotch-Brite pad or 220 grit. I then follow that with 4 or 5 very light coats of Rust-Oleum's Professional line flat black enamel. I've used this on several other projects, and I've really been impressed by its durability.
Man, this thing is starting to look really good. Now, in my experience, the key to a really long-lasting, durable Rust-Oleum paint job is 2 things. You're going to want to do a bunch of very light coats with both your primer and your top coat. And secondly, after you're done painting, you're going to want to hang it up somewhere and don't touch it for, I would say, at least 3 days. I like to wait up to 7 days. Just because the paint is dry to the touch definitely doesn't mean the paint is dry, so don't install anything. Hang it up, let it sit for a week. The paint will be so much more durable. In those first 24 hours, this stuff dings up, scratches up really, really easily. You're just gonna see a big improvement if you can set that aside, let it fully cure up before you go to install it. I know it's kind of hard to do, especially with a DIY project. The paint's the last thing you want to do, so you're just kind of itching to get it installed, but I'd highly encourage you not to do that. I'm not gonna leave mine just black paint. I wanna try some Raptor liner. I've never tried this stuff before and I like the way that it looks, so I'm only gonna paint the ladder section with the Raptor liner. I'm not gonna do the top or bottom bracket with it. So I'm gonna scuff this surface up and then get the bed liner coating on. All right guys, the last thing we need to do before we get this thing mounted up is that if there are any surfaces of your brackets or the ladder itself that touch the vehicle, like metal to metal, we're gonna cover those surfaces with our double-sided mounting tape. So on our top bracket, cover all of this surface here, and then also inside the trough. On the bottom bracket, the only piece that might touch the vehicle is this bottom flat section. The two sides don't touch at all. And then there's one bottom edge of the ladder that makes contact with the bottom edge of the vehicle. So I'm gonna get all that covered in my double-sided mounting tape, and then we're gonna get this thing installed. Super excited. All right guys, all the paint's dry. We're ready to install. Let's get it on here. All right guys, I hope y'all have enjoyed this one as much as I have. I'm really pleased with the way this ladder has turned out. Y'all be sure to like and subscribe on this video. It really helps the channel out. And of course, leave your questions in the comment section below. I don't upload very often, so if you want to be notified when I do upload, be sure to hit that bell notification next to the subscribe button. And I hope to see you guys in the next video.